service abroad, I wanted to find out the common denominator between my own country and the host country. So when I was in Sweden in the 80s, 85 to 89, I was looking for the obvious thing which combines the two countries, namely travel accounts of Swedes who are visiting the Holy Land, the land of Israel, and among them, of course, I found at the beginning of this 18th century emissaries of Charles XII, who was defeated in Poltava, as we remember, and then set in Bender in captivity, I would say, benevolent captivity of the Ottomans, and he sent people to the Holy Land, and they came back and they reported and they wrote diaries, and they wrote, and some others wrote for them, and other Swedes were also attracted by the Holy Land, and it came to me a certain pattern of their stories, how they were painted on the body. And it occurred to me that within 50 years, it is always the same paintings or the same motifs which they have been tattooed, and it was clear to me that it must be tattooed, but I didn't know how. So I began not to be satisfied with the sources I had, and I, as a known detective, looking for more sources, which were, of course, among travel accounts and pilgrims accounts, and this is how I came into the business of history of pilgrimages to the Holy Land. And then I saw not only that it is something in common with all those motive descriptions, but I also saw that even if travelers are not going to the Holy Land, but going as discoverers or as missionaries to Canada or to the Pacific or to Japan and making a stopover in Thailand, and this needs for me an explanation. I was also in Thailand and I was desperate how I can find a common denominator when it comes to pilgrims and travelers in those times between Thailand and Israel. And I found, for instance, Kempfer, who was a very famous traveler to Japan, who is owing, and Japan owes him a lot in terms of the early history, known to the Europeans. They explain, well, I see that the natives, or in that sense, the guard of the palace in Ayutthaya, at that time the capital of Siam, bears signs similar to those to the pilgrims which are coming back from the holy sepulchre of Jerusalem. The same with Sajar, who probably have seen what the Hurons, Indian tribes in Canada. The same. They are, in order to explain what he sees, he is always referring to the Jerusalem marks. Now, we are in the period before James Cook. No common agreed terminology. So I would say that Jerusalem marks for people in the 17th century served as a prototype of tattooing marks in the lack of any other terminology. Now, when I wrote my piece 10 years ago, and actually I make the first remarks in 1992, because I wrote about the Swedish travelers, not knowing exactly that it is a vast common phenomenon, although I have to tell you that I had some suspicions that it may be much more widely known. I I dated the first appearance of that kind of pilgrim's tattoo on European skin, by the way. This is a very interesting differentiation between Oriental skin and not because of the color, but because of the habits. because I firmly believe that tattoos was not known in those centuries in Europe, or at least at the late Middle Ages, it only began to be known. I found out that the first one was in 1556, and lately I became a mailbox to all new findings, and there was one who was suggesting evidence from 1484. He's talking about branding, probably. This is what I understood from this old Flemish text. But still, it is the first evidence we know that definitely was brought back from Jerusalem. This is very important for someone who is dealing with pilgrim tattoos from the Holy Land and not from other places. Now, we have here shortly a good breakdown of the first evidences. I would like to stress this kind of gentleman, Finis Morrison, who is not tattooed. Why he was not tattooed? Because he was not Catholic. So he specifically is telling it as in his account. And we have this phenomenon how people are non-Catholic Latin Western pilgrims are treated. We'll come to that later. When I said we have to distinguish between European skin and Oriental skin, I mean that not that the skin is different. I mean that the traditions in the Orient are continuously done and are known not only, I would say, irrespective of religion. They are known to Muslims, they are known to Jews, I'm not sure, because the rigidity on that kind is much earlier, already as we heard with the 11th century at most. But I would say that here we have the Oriental tradition also embracing the Oriental Christians. Here we have a very nice picture of a Fatimid dancer from the end of the 12th century. If you would like to visit her originally, you have to go to Israel Museum. It is one of the seldom drawings on paper of that time, very early, of the late 11th century. And she bears what I would say is a tattoo. And I was strengthened by this, not only because of pattern, and I mean the one on the chest, the one on the hand seems to be much more henna, but this chest reminded me very much wooden blocks which I've seen at the Metropolitan in New York, where they claim that it is a textile block. And I would like to make here a reference to the proximity of textile block to body painting blocks, if you like, or tattoo blocks, because this is the same skill. You need the same skill for carving the wood. Here I want to show you here a whole plate of carved woods seen in East Jerusalem, in Via Dolorosa, which served as a textile block for the whole sheet of textile covering the grave of Jesus. You know that we have a tradition to make measures, to take measures of the grave, and this was the one which was printed and of course sold to pilgrims. I would think that the same skill is needed also to tattoo stamps, and I brought from Jerusalem several examples which you see what I mean. Most of them are from the 18th and 19th century. The oldest dated one is from 1752, from 1749, which is an Armenian and which is significant why it is Armenian. We come to that later. Now, the practice is shared by Oriental Christians, Copt, Ethiopians, and Armenians. Here we have the Coptic, here we have Ethiopian. This is a very significant, I remarked before that We don't know what the laser technique will bring to permanent body marks. It may force us to change some definitions or concept. Here it is a typical example of an Ethiopian immigrant to Israel, which a dermatological laboratory in Herzliya is volunteering to laser out the cross on her forefront in order to enable her to integrate better in the country. So I think it is done for a good cause, because otherwise it would be quite difficult, but one is labeled immediately. Body marks practices among Muslims, among dervishes, are clear enough. We don't know for sure whether Ottoman Yeniçeri has been tattooed. At least we have some evidences which are pictorial. Written sources we lack for the time being, or at least are not known to me. There were practiced, the tattoo masters were those who were closest in the 17th century to the Franciscans. You should know that the Franciscans at the Custodia of Terra Santa tried to monopolize the traffic of pilgrims from Europe, and therefore the question of Latin or Catholic and Protestant was in a way topical. But the ones who were tattooing were dragomans of the Franciscans in Bethlehem. This is not a picture from Bethlehem, but at least to you to understand what dragoman is doing. It is a go-between between the Franciscans and the local population, or for that matter, for the pilgrims. They were also the guides. So we know that the lingua franca at the 17th century in the Holy Land was Italian. This is very interesting that this shows you the influence of the Franciscans. You see here, this is, by the way, their coat of arms, which is still visible in many buildings in Jerusalem and in Ein Kerem, or wherever they have still property in Israel. I wanted only to mark here that the hands, one arm is Jesus, and the other one is Franciscus. Now, the whole stigmata is for the Franciscans a very welcome tool how to introduce a trademark, if you like. But a trademark which is very much telling, I would say, not shared by the Dominicans, of course. They don't have that kind of proximity in stigmata. And Heinrich saw this effort to inscribe IHS on his chest is a kind of an effort to create a tradition, but it is much less known. This is, of course, admonishing to donate to the custodian for the pilgrims, and you see how they are very much playing with this coat of arms, which is their trademark. Not only the coat of arms, they also instituted the knighthood of the Holy Sepulchre in the late 15th century, not earlier. So if someone comes to you and tell you, well, the Knight of the Holy Sepulchre has been introduced by the Crusades, First Crusade, simply it is a legend, it is a myth, there is no proof for it. What we know is that the first knight, so to speak, was knighted in 1336, and it was institutionalized by the Franciscans in the late 15th century. And here we have to see the whole tattooing business, if you like, as a religious paraphernalia, as a memento for the souvenir, within the rise of, I would say, early tourist industry or pilgrim industry in Bethlehem. It was in the it was in the early 17th century, late 16th, early 17th, just at the time where the first evidence of tattooing Western pilgrims come up. And this was, of course, a design how to employ those Christians or those who were converting to Catholicism, because the majority there is always Greek Orthodox, you have to know. So they were converted, and the Franciscan custodia wanted to employ them, to give them a living, and it was therefore a very good, welcome income source. You see those very intricate models which we find everywhere in Europe. It began at that period. Now, we have, from the iconographic point of view, a very interesting hoard of wood blocks, but we have them also in traveling books. This is from Lithgow, which is, of course, bringing up the most, I would say, the number one in the ranking of Latin symbols to be tattooed, and this is the cross of Jerusalem, as we see here on the top. Don't believe anyone who will tell you that the cross of Jerusalem is a Crusader's cross. Since it occurred to me that it is so prevalent among Latin tattooings for pilgrims, I began to investigate the origins of that cross, and I came to the conclusion, although I don't know the origins, but I know exactly what, because the origin is probably from ancient, early Christianity. But in the Middle Ages at least, we know that it began to be used as a form only in the early 14th century. First one to have a visual evidence of it is Giotto in the Cappella Sloveni in Padua. Anyway, we have here a sample of those tattoos which are not original, but actually done by incising copper plates and has been printed in the book. This Radgestuber, which Professor Landfester mentioned, is very interesting in a sense that this was Radgestuber is a Hamburgian, comes from Hamburg, which is at that time grossly Lutheran. In order to be knighted in Jerusalem, he had two possibilities: or not to be knighted at all, or to convert to Catholicism as the Franciscan demanded, because they issued also the certificate of the knighthood, which was some kind of a certificate of having done the pilgrimage. Now, he changed, probably they negotiated it, and the outcome was that he became a Rochus, which is in Italian Rocco, a very known saying of the pest. And I would say that was for him the only possibility to get knighted. So we have this certificate still in an archive in Hamburg, and I found it interesting because it gives you an insight of the behind the scene of the pilgrimages at that time, and what does it mean that the Franciscans kept the monopoly of this for a long time. Now we have again a Prussian fellow who gets time. Remember this sign because it will play for us in the iconographic analysis a major role. This Resurrexit Propter Justificationem Nostrum. Here we have another one. We have also a whole Via Dolorosa, which itinerary here we have on the arm of this Prussian fellow. I would say that this is, of course, the skill of the woodcarver on the 17th century is not good enough to distinguish between left and right. So actually what they at least they carved the letters correctly, but the way is left to right. So if one knows, and here I try to construct next to it what they really describe, and the Via Dolorosa at that time was a little bit different than ours today. It underwent a little bit changes, and it is not a new sensational information. This is remarkable how it is on a road map, if you like, on your own arm. There were also distinguished gentlemen who were coming back from the Holy Land with tattooed arms. One of them is Ludolf, 1699. I have to tell you that I was shown this picture in Halle, in the foundation of Franke, which is a hoard of a lot of documentation and archives, archival material for the 17th and 18th century. And this gentleman was not known. I saw it, and I saw the year. I could identify that this is 1699. I knew that a certain gentleman named Ludolf corresponded with Franke, who was the chief of the house of the Pietist Institute there. I knew that they corresponded, the one in Jerusalem and the one was receiving it in Halle. So I could make an intelligent guess that this must be Ludolf, because this, at least, it was shown that it is from Jerusalem, and we saw the year, and indeed it is attributed today to him, because before it was still anonymous. Since then, I got another portrait from another gentleman, 1701, with the same tattoos, and I guess that we have still unknown portraits of that time with such pilgrim tattoos. But you see here the ink pot, and you see here the stilo, the one or two, how do you call it, needles with the canes, and you see a quite worried female pilgrim, but he's, I think she's brave. I cannot attribute who it is in terms of whether it is Armenian or Copt, but we know that since the first dated woodblock is Armenian, I guess that they were very active, probably preceded the Copts in this trade in Jerusalem. Now we have a sample of how it looks like. I showed you. This is from another hoard. It's typical that beginning, when I investigated the matter, I got the Razuk family, which is a Coptic family, with a hoard which has been also documented by a British scholar who simply issued a catalog of those stamps. I didn't bring it with me, but it's a quite rare book, 200 or so copies exist, and it is a much stolen book, I think, in libraries today. But it's very interesting. If you have a good eyes, you can see holes here. That is the same stamp on both sides, and if you can see here also a hole, you can see the same. So this is actually, to my mind, an evidence of the mobile occupation of tattooers. They are going where the pilgrims are. They are not asking, like in Hamburg, come into my shop. They are going after, and they are also seasonal working, because the whole idea of having wood blocks is twofold. One, we have to seek the peaks of the pilgrimage, which in Jerusalem always Easter, much less than Nativity, than Christmas. Secondly, we have to save time, because the queue is very long and Easter is very short. So let's make it much easier. We will prepare motifs of requested or on-demand motifs which we may think will be in demand, and then we will be able to serve all the clients. And this is actually how I understand this trade. Small only pictures how it works, positions. We have those stamps, by the way. It's we have they are at least 200 years old. Now,
can I ask a question? Sorry.
Yes, please.
Are you distinguishing between the tattooing using ink on a block?
Later on.
You're talking about two different kinds of tattooing, I think, right?
No, only one.
So the needle is used in conjunction with the wooden block?
Of course, the wooden block is only to print the motif, and then comes the needle, which I showed you before. So okay. It is a two-stage as usual. There's nothing, they are only saving time not painting it by hand, by printing it. They can print it on the body, of course. Now, I told you that the dragomans were from Bethlehem, and we have evidence also in terms of scarcity of reports in the 18th century that nobody or actually is reporting anymore from Bethlehem, but much more his encounter with tattoos in Jerusalem. So I found also a visible explanation how this transfer from Bethlehem of the activity, tattooing activity, from the dragomans to the Armenian and Copts, I would say to the Oriental Christians in Jerusalem. And by, well, it's a little bit distorted, but never mind, it's, this we have seen already from the 17th century. This is 1694, has been published. I guess it is a little bit earlier, the motive. And this is a motive which is known. Resurrection was very much en vogue, in fashion by the Oriental Christians. This is actually, the church is termed the Church of the Resurrection. So the resurrection here is a very much known motive among the Coptic horde which we have, which is in Israel. We see almost more than 50% are the resurrection, which means high in demand. Now here we have the resurrection with complete nice Latin letters, and this is also from the period where dragomans under the supervision of the Franciscans has been working in Bethlehem. Here we have a tattoo block, a wood block, which to my mind is a simulating Latin scriptures, but he doesn't know actually what he's engraving. And here, the third one, a very, very Oriental resurrection with a lot of lamps next to the grave. Well, we have, this is a style which we know from most of the Coptic and Armenian woodblocks. But I had another puzzle in front of me, and this was created by those three blocks. Here, I would say a normal educated person would say what he sees here. He sees St. John the Baptist, or probably Veronica with the Sudarium. And what disturbed me is that why I see a Veronica with the Sudarium in Jerusalem. It belongs much more to Rome. It's not, although it is included in a way today in the Via Dolorosa, but it is a later introduction. It's not the whole Via Dolorosa is a later introduction. It is on demand, I would say. Via Dolorosa is on demand of the Christian pilgrims coming to Jerusalem, not a genuine institution which was founded or invented in Jerusalem. So it was a kind of reenactment, and Maurice Halbwachs is very clear on that. So I found out that it cannot be, or it should be probably not Veronica. Then I found out that this must be a head, cut head. And then I remembered that the Armenians, and we are talking about Armenian tattooers, tattoo masters, had venerating the head of St. James the Great in the Armenian church, the cathedral in Jerusalem. And this is of course not the only head which is venerated by St. James the Major, but also of course in Compostela. This is a more known place of his head. And so this was an instigation to, for another research on the head of St. James the Great. Here, I think in this case, we see here an Armenian tattoo masters are making dual use. A Latin pilgrim comes, this is for him, Veronica. An Armenian comes, this is, of course, St. James. So this is part of the explanation, because they are quite numerous, and of course very much in demand. This is, of course, likely most popular motive among Latin pilgrims, and this was also an instigate. And here we have a very strange woodblock, where whoever can identify here Hebrew letters, and it can be identified, it is Jerusalem. So it speaks in the 19th century for a certain Jewish demand for stamps. And Burchett, the tattooer, the master tattooer, who is the first one to biograph his life, I don't know whether he wrote it himself, he tells, he deserted the Navy in Jaffa. He went to Jerusalem. He was beaten there because he claimed to have a stall of tattooing with the hygiene rules, which were, of course, in Europe desired, but in Jerusalem, among the tattooers, it was unfair competition, probably. So he has left the place. But he's telling also that there are tattooers of many nations, French, English, Copts, Armenians, and also Jews. So I would like to leave it open. This is interesting in its such. And here we have only the last two paintings, photos. Jacob Razuk himself, whose tattoos we have seen up till now. And this is a hand of one of his wood blocks. You can see that until today I have to admit that I'm a little bit a freak. I'm going with the camera to the old city, and whenever I see one, I ask to take a photo. This is also photos of mine, the present day tattooing a lady in, she is Copt. Some of them Armenian, some of them Copts. There's no real distinction between the two when it comes to pilgrims tattooing. They have to tattoo themselves because it's a calendar. You know, every pilgrimage is here dated, so you can see, you can meet some with more than one date on their arm. And this is gypsy in Jerusalem, only to tell you that there are gypsies who are tattooed, but this seems to be more, this is not a motive, but probably a therapeutical point. And for the end, a gross Coptic motive, not with a woodblock, but probably in a modern tattoo studio. Thank you very much.